Okay. All right, I think we're gonna get started. So we are being recorded in a couple places here, hopefully capture things in a way that's legible later in that regard. So just so everyone's aware of that. So thanks for coming. It's a busy weekend, of course, but we wanted to continue the conversation for all along this process, sort of some new thinking on what we can do. And some more analysis and supporting information around like what 5 years looks like, what 10 years looks like, answer those sort of questions. So we hadn't had a chance, we presented to the board the results of the survey. We also wanted to go through some of those results with the community in this context so that we can have some questions about the survey and pieces of data. So we're going to do that part first. And then we're gonna go through sort of a new frame of thinking on ways we can look out 5 to 10 years and have a more sort of more thoughtful, long process that achieves sort of more goals in terms of what the community feedback has been, and also make sure that we're also working towards the goals of the committee around space equity. And all the things we talked about in the past. Right, so that agenda, the survey results, the sort of the data over time for the schools, the 3 neighborhood scenario, which has been sort of the thinking sort of in the public and in the most recently, more focused on the New Franklin space concerns. Whether it's space and also condition of space, those are sort of like 2 different but related concerns. What transition neighborhoods means, and then we'll talk at the end of the presentation. Just again, information.
We'll pause for discussion between each of those, just so you know sort of what's coming up, and that way we'll be able to have a conversation about each one of those.
Yeah, and everything that's reported, and then the minutes are getting uploaded to this redistricting committee site that Zach put together. So it should be there for posterity. So into the community survey results. Carrie, do you want to talk through?
Sure.
Yeah.
So overall, the survey had a pretty large reach. So we had 512 respondents that had current or incoming students. This was sent out via Parent Square to all current students, and then it was also put out on social media and then sent to daycares and preschools that are often where our new students come from, with a request that they send out to parents. So parents that would have Portsmouth enrolled kids. And so that was actually a pretty good number. We got about 50 or so. No more than that. We got 65 responses for those that don't yet have kids in the school that will be enrolling later. And so that actually helped us a little bit to try to get some projections, and we'll talk about that when we talk about kind of the modeling and what we're expecting. I think the biggest thing in this was very clear the importance of parent choice in the survey. And then in subsequent communication that we've gotten from community members to the board, but a really large preference for grandfathering and grandfathering for multiple years and things like that, which factors into somewhat of some of our comments or current thinking on the 3 neighborhood transition and what the actual. And so this was more of the grandfathering, but it was really around around all in siblings, which is very challenging for a district to do. Not that it's not impossible, but just the idea that a transition plan may be 10 years as opposed to 5 years of when the kids are in school. And so that was an important factor. And as we continue to hear that, sort of why we put out on a Friday thoughts about a different plan that we think might be more feasible to be responsive. In general, the most important things were grandfathering, equitable class size, and to disrupt the least number of students. So some of the scenarios we put in the, originally were more sort of geographic distribution, which moved a lot of students. And those are not plans that we talked about most recently. And as far as who responded with incoming students, most of them were incoming Ks in 2025, but we also even captured some that have kids coming up through 2029. So one of the things we were looking at is, in an ideal world, right, if we had this 3 neighborhood solution and Powder House, Lafayette, and Hillside were like, you know what, we all want to move, let's just go. That might be a feasible solution, but if we want to hold the parent choice and the grandfathering options with that, this is kind of where we went. There was the biggest section of neighborhoods. So we asked all Dondero and New Franklin parents or caregivers or whatever you want to call them, whether they would consider a transition or what their current thought process was. And I'd say there was like 1 or 2 from every neighborhood that would be interested in moving to Little Harbor. But the largest group was Lafayette Park. And then we saw minimal support for these changes around banded schools. A lot of folks in the comments said that they moved to Portsmouth because of the neighborhood schools, that they wanted that longer term cohort that their kids got closer with. And then minimal support for moving the 5th grade to middle. And we have talked about this in other things, but in some cases, 50% of our students are walking to school or biking to school. And each school has their different flavor. So there's a lot of bikers here. There's a lot of walkers at New Franklin. And so that's just one thing that we have just want to consider, or was important to folks, is that with neighborhood schools, those families that are walkable like that walkability, and therefore the bandits, that's probably why folks don't want the K1, 2, 3 approach. So with that, so there was 2 things. So one of the principals had reached out to all of the K or preschool daycares that Portsmouth students usually come from, to ask for information about children that would likely be enrolling. So this is the first time that this has ever been done. Because I'm trying to think of the year, 2 years ago, there was a big K bubble at Dondero, or a big K class, where they had 60 students or somewhere in that ballpark. And so one of the interventions to try to get a better idea of that was to start K registration earlier last year, try to put it out. I'd say it was minimally successful because a lot of folks move in, August, June. And so we had some idea, but there's still that transition in that summer where we're not going to reach those folks that move into town. But from the survey and parents who completed the survey, and from outreach to preschools and daycares, this is what we have for actual numbers currently for coming in. There's definitely some nuance to it, but we look at this as like, this is the bare minimum. So if we've already identified 49 students coming into K in the Dondero catchment, probably it's going to be higher than that. Of course, some will move, some will stay, etc. Any questions or any? Yes.
I know that you said there were 565 responses and 512 for families. Like, what is
Staff. They all were staff. A few did, but not many.
like a lot of Franklin? It felt like a lot of New Franklin staff was responding to the space concerns there.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure.
I'll write down, to look at it, but my recall is that, more than half of them just said staff, but I can look to see if that was, or-
Like, you're saying,
Anecdotally from down there and the figure, which wasn't this past summer, but the previous one, there was 15 that came in August, so essentially the entire class.
in
And there
that-
were some in July. I mean, that was, yeah, so just in August it was 15. But I think we came close to 2 classrooms worth of kids. It was unusual for that to happen, but it was close to, close to 2 classrooms worth of kids
in,
in the summer.
in general, the largest number of those July, August registrations happen in current Dondero catchment areas. If that-
Usually Patriots Park, it's usually a couple of the apartment, the old Beachstone, those places tend to turn over in the summer.
Just some feedback. So I have 2 children at Coast Community School. No survey went out there. One is in the preschool program. So I don't know that this is a survey results. I mean, if you look at it, over 75% are people who are currently enrolled.
Yeah,
There wasn't
so-
really a big voice from, I don't think people realize really what's happening, what's coming down the pike for their neighborhoods. So I'm just wondering if there's any other way that we could get greater feedback from the community.
Yeah, so Seacoast Community School and Keep and their affiliate, all those classrooms, they did provide the addresses to us of incoming K students. So those are all included on the database that estimate these numbers.
Like incoming 25, 26 K students,
Mhm.
right, but you didn't get the
The
feedback,
survey.
Right.
survey information from.
But what we can do is look at how many responded, because once we have the addresses and the address from the survey, we paired those. So we know how many like Seacoast Community Schools given students completed the survey.
Yes, but just for that 1 year, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So. I mean, we're looking at a transition of 5+ years, so I feel like we should at least be surveying families with kids who will be impacted for 5+ years.
Yeah, and if there's any other ideas on how to do that, the reach out to we can't require preschools to send them or other ways, but we can't require them to send them, but we did send it to all of the preschools. So just keep that in mind if you have other suggestions or neighborhood canvassing.
Know how much coordination do I think every timing things has been fast too, you know what I mean? Like, we have the survey, we're sending it out, but then there's only, I don't know how much time we gave people to coordinate sending that out with families or discuss it with their team first before sending it out, you know what I mean? So I just think that that's a piece to consider too, that it takes a bit of time.
to get through that process.
Yeah.
On the last slide, there was the numbers of the incoming. Aside historically from that K bubble that you mentioned, not that one, the last one, that one. Outside of the K bubble, what is a historic number that you can kind of bounce this off of? Is that par or is that high? Is that low? Outside of the K bubble, we all get that happen. Is this normal or is this above or below average?
We have Dondero, we have all the schools more than the top. But that's not at the grade level. So you can see the population over time. We have that looking back. And that's later, a little bit more on analysis of what we've seen over the last 10 years in general population. All of this. We don't have, in this year, with this many kids at pay, that.
Yeah, that seems like a very important line item given. Is there a way to find that?
Other than starting to collect data now.
It seems pretty important.
Yeah, that's I think that's, forward looking in terms of what the committee's role is. I think data collection and monitoring. Yeah.
You say you have 500 and whatever,
people who fill out the survey with attendance. Is that specific to elementary school?
Yes.
Yeah. If you have looked, for instance, my family, my husband and I both did a survey, did you look? for
Yeah.
things?
Oops, yeah.
Yep, yep. So we, part of data cleaning was looking for duplicates, either by address or by grade level and doing that. And then, so some of the analyses were, so the stuff about enrollment, all filtered out those duplicates. The stuff about the public opinion or things like that did not.
So the 20 Lafayette family would count for the that.
Yes, to the best of our ability.
Was it 20 families or 20?
It was 20 children. Yeah, number of children. Yes, not families.
How many?
I could find that. I do,
I wanna like,
I don't feel, because we have had some folks reach out feeling like, they are having some sort of, not trying to find a lighter word for retaliation, but that they're having to explain their own family's choices to their neighbors who desperately want to stay in the neighborhood. I don't want to get too specific about this family has a second and fourth grader and this one. Yeah,
Not that I know.
okay.
but it was-
I'll give you their addresses. Yeah, I'll just, yeah. That's an easy one.
Lot of the abandoned schools being picked from 2 or 5, which as a teacher seems really crazy, too much transition, like for students, right? It's only like 2 years. But what hasn't been brought up, and I know I shared. Like, the whole K to 3, K to 2, and 3 to 5. And obviously, this would be something that could happen right away, but from what I hear, it's not like we do something right away. But I think if we looked at our school with Don Darrow having that like outdoor classroom space, that could be, it would lend itself to be a really amazing K to 2 school. And then Little Harbour being so close to downtown, with grades 3 to 5, having a lot of history, it would help. City use a 2 to, or sorry, K to 2 and a 3 to 5 model. And I totally get that people love their neighborhoods. I mean, my kids could bike to Don Darrow or can't bike to Don Darrow, and it's nice out. So I get that piece, but I think that if we highlight good that could come from that, potentially would help, you know, people see it in a different light. And I also think that it gets rid of the whole socio-economic, you know.
More equitable to
Yeah,
have a rid of
it's
the programs, yeah.
more
yeah, I definitely think, I mean, I'll just say, I don't think there's a short term, like 5 years. Even, I mean, maybe 10 years. I mean, you'd have to build,
right.
right? And so, as I said this before, it's like in the scope of this discussion, if we can disagree on, or there can be sort of what the feelings are as far as like, is this something we need to do now? If it's something you need to do now, I don't think that direction, right? Yeah.
But what I was hearing is that it might not need to be done right now, so I think if we have more time, we can make like these 2 really amazing, rich learning environments that are developmentally appropriate for students at those ages. And it would also give them like, some kids are doing this curriculum at Little Harbour, and other kids are doing this at Don Darrow. Everybody would have, each student, of course, would have the same educational opportunity.
And I think we'll get into sort of, there's the process of like what needs to happen next. And I think that in general, my impression has been that a redistricting committee looks once, decides if it's needed, yes, no, and moves on. And so I definitely think there's great benefits in having that longer term planning that you're talking about as a recommendation of this process, to envision what happens in 10 years and begin planning for the improvements that need to happen for that to happen. Thank you for bringing.
I think it's unfair to ask them in a survey if they agree with the K1 or K2 school and dividing kids up by age level, if they don't have the bonuses and all they see is my kid can't walk to school anymore. But if you have an educator stand up and show how beneficial it is to students, parents might be like, wow, that's wonderful. I would love to be in a community like that. My kid can walk or bike for 2 years. Also, or 3 years. Also, a big conversation during the tour was, what's the history? Like, what's going to happen to Franklin? If you're looking at really getting rid of New Franklin, eventually that's a wonderful solution. And if it's presented appropriately, people will buy it. It's a fantastic plan for this.
Apologies if this isn't the right time to ask, or if I missed it in some of the data collection and presentation, but I'm curious, should the school board go ahead with redistricting? Have you looked at 3 neighborhoods and looked at each child that would be affected and what their grade is and what the spread is? Because we haven't seen that data yet, so you could have 25th graders and moving them could create another bubble, let's say. So we just haven't seen that yet, I don't believe, and so it's not to say that a redistricting right away could solve the problem, because you're not going to move them and fill these empty classrooms that you're going to have here with one solid class, if that makes sense. They're going to be spread out, and we just haven't seen what that spread looks like.
We have some of that. I think we'll pause on that because we maybe don't get into that level of detail, but we have more detail coming in sort of the next pieces. Anything else on the survey stuff?
Okay. So I think this is just sort of a little bit historic of what we've talked about previously, which was Lafayette. It's great big screen. We can actually see the map this time. So we have Powder House, Lafayette, and Hillside. This is what historically we talked about moving them with 5 years of grandfathering. I think to actually directly to your point, Jen, is like if you don't do grandfathering, you can have more a certainty around like what's going to happen, right? And we definitely hear from the community around grandfathering, and even this level of grandfathering, I think, didn't capture siblings. And so when we look towards, and so what we're going to get into is as we look towards a different approach, which takes more time, and sort of the analysis of a longer tail and more neighborhoods being involved. And we'll sort of like talk through that a little bit. Yes.
So, and this gets a little bit at what you were saying. We did not do it by grade level just because of the identifying parts of it, but in general, we thought with a 3 neighborhood move, there is about 13.
Well, so the 20 is like if you look into the survey data, there's a bunch of survey respondents that was like, if my neighbor went. So it was sort of in between a yes and a no. So that was like the approximate 20. This is 13 would say yes. I think there's a little bit of a group there that's like there was something else, and there was sort of like a narrative around under what scenarios they would go.
And so what we did put was the largest group in there, which was 3 entering K in Powder House and 5 entering K in Lafayette Park. And so part of the community feedback has been the importance of grandfathering, as we said, but that, we had received feedback from New Franklin families who had conversations both with administration at New Franklin and amongst their community, that really said that this isn't gonna affect New Franklin. It's not gonna improve things at New Franklin in the near future. And so as we looked back at that to try to sort of test that out, or looking at the data, the improvement would only be seen if we didn't offer grandfathering. So that's sort of what has led us to, like, if we want to try to find something that's responsive, we have to move to a different spot than the free neighborhood one.
So, yeah, don't know, yeah.
Well, those seem like two conversations. If the building's falling apart, the building's falling apart, that's a budget conversation.
Yeah.
This is a redistricting.
Yes.
It should not be in the same conversation. In my, I don't think that whether children leave or go, well, conversation like it. Totally, completely different conversations. And sure, all costs a ton of money. That's a planning thing, that's a data driven thing. Historically, we should have seen this coming. Declining school or growing population, but at the same time. It doesn't, like, they don't talk, they shouldn't talk, they're just two completely different.
Yeah, so I think,
I want to get to that conversation with the next set of slides
Okay,
though,
okay.
because I think they help to talk where we see them connected. We have that. Are there any other questions on this part?
How you're talking about neighborhood,
This is only that three neighborhood piece.
so you're gonna talk about neighborhoods later down.
yes, we're gonna talk.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want me to just move to the next part? Okay, hold on, Pip, and then. Okay. Let me move to the next slide. Let's just skip this part and then we'll get there, because, yeah.
You just talk about Concord and Lafayette, but
Hillside, yes, yeah, Lafayette, yeah.
You just don't, they don't wanna go. They're there.
Okay,
Wait, those are only the people who want to go?
no, this is the previous conversation has focused on these three neighborhoods.
Right.
So that's,
No, the slide before or is the slide after? Before?
no, there-
Okay, so what might help clarify is that 0 Hillside students would like to transition.
hold on. That's not entirely the case, because, yeah, I don't think I think there is one, I'm not.
There's, yeah.
Oh, now people would be hunting that family in Hillside.
We know who it is. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. You want to cover?
yeah, so these are three spaces, and this is meant to, talk about. So there's quality of space and there's space restraints. Those are two different conversations. I think it's an excellent point. So the slide on the right, I think to me speaks to space constraints at New Franklin, which is that this is a supply closet and it's being used for intervention space. And it doesn't matter if it's the nicest supply closet in the world, it's still a supply closet. And then on the left is space, the top is Don Darrow, which is the most recently renovated space. And the bottom is Little Harbour, but they are dedicated spaces specifically for that task. And the reason that, and here's the other thing on the investment. I think it's definitely a easier path to invest in a space that is designed and guaranteed that it will be for that thing. As opposed to, and this goes into the next slide.
Can I just say one thing
Yeah.
before we move on?
Yeah.
So in this, the upper photo is Don Darrow. So part of the renovation was sort of making like 2 classrooms into a wing of special education. And so this is from inside one of, I think, 6 rooms that are for either individual students or a small group of students. So there's many of these rooms that are like that, and there's not comparable at either, or
So
at New Franklin.
I definitely,
There's a little bit different
yeah.
at Little Harbour.
Yeah, I would definitely, yeah, like Don Darrow has 2 sort of office suites associated towards intervention and special education. I would say, I mean, this is just my take, but in the case of Little Harbor, there is space available that is dedicated to it. It isn't as well designed because it's longer out in terms of renovation, right? It just hasn't had that cycle to go through it. And then New Franklin, you don't have the space, A, and B, it's in disrepair. So both of those things. And then,
And
so,
this lower space is at Little Harbor, but a dedicated physical therapy and occupational therapy space for students, which rolls into the next.
So just with those pictures, are you trying to like show us, like, there's in the school they have,
yes,
okay,
yes.
and because, I mean, this looks much more academic, like the other top two are more academic, but that's totally dedicated to like physical therapy type.
There's both. So I mean, we could, one of the things we had talked about doing and could still do if it's helpful is side by sides of what these spaces look like in every place.
Okay.
But these are just like little, like, I think it was clear from folks that were able to join the tours that the spaces are different. And it's clear sort of that there's change needed to get all of the spaces to the same level.
And so the sweet suite at New Franklin, and this is a space, and this is where this is less space quality and more space, available space concern. If a school is sort of like redlining on how much classroom space they have, this is being used as multiple different things. It's
So
a conference area, it's intervention space, it's physical therapy, and there's
Italian.
Italian,
It's-
yeah. And there's a world where this needs to be used as a classroom. And then where do those services go in a building already that doesn't have a service?
And I would say for next year.
Yeah.
We think it's a coin flip.
Yeah.
Based on where we're at,
Yeah.
enrollment, we can anticipate that this would have to come offline to be a kindergarten class. We don't know, but that's kind of where we're at.
So this is what I was thinking about in regards to your question, that it's not that yes, there is the quality of space, but there's also the piece that we're very likely to take this space that already serves 6 purposes offline for the school, furthering this, the challenges space. So as we have funds coming or, renovation plans coming or things like that, there's still an immediate impact to students next year that we're concerned about. Yes.
I just wanna, I'm confused why it's a coin flip. New Franklin's numbers have been very stable. You're estimating now that there's about 25, give or take, that are gonna start kindergarten next year, so with 10 extra
So
students.
this is from Joanne.
I know.
So he said, Joanne, based on your period of time in which you've done this and what you know at this moment and what outcomes have been in the past, she's like 64. Now, and that's,
Way that they could keep the space, and no one's having that discussion. But
What,
anyway, sorry.
what do you, tell me more.
What-
So, well, at the upper grade level, at New Franklin, they tend to, if they have like, so the 2 upper grade levels that are there now, they had 3 for kindergarten. But then they, right, like they're 20
Yeah.
and 21, same with, and then they're 20 and 20. They didn't always have that number of students, and at the lower grade level, it's different. The grade with the smaller schools, the numbers you're working with there are very different than the other.
Mhm.
And I think that if Joanne was like, oh, crap, we are gonna have a 3rd kindergarten class, there would be a discussion about this thing, leveling out.
absolutely. No, that absolutely happens on an annual basis. The principals have to sit down. And we're in situations where we're in May and we've got one plan about what we're doing. And then we get unanticipated kind of concentration of enrollment on a particular grade level. And then they're going to teachers and they're saying, I know I told you you were gonna do 4th grade next year. You're not. You're doing 2nd. And we're gonna expand the size of the remaining 4th grade to that happens all the time. And so when she's saying, that's coin flip, she's anticipating still that type of work that would be necessary. She still thinks that the coin flip that we would lose this week.
So I think, yeah, and I think whether or not it goes or it has to go, I think that what's important for me is still that we're in a place where we have to have that conversation. Feels like it'd be better if we didn't have to have that conversation. We had the dedicated space and we could renovate it specifically for the services that we want to provide. And so that's sort of like when I doubt everything that we talked about, that's what comes back on the other side, is sort of like, you do nothing. And we don't, like, I'm worried about it.
And I hear you, like,
Yeah.
we do nothing, but still, if we do something and they have a classroom, that's not fair. That
Yeah.
school has that one classroom
Yeah,
compared to the other schools.
I
in the
agree with-
state.
yeah.
Like, what are we doing? I'm gonna tell you, city council has no idea. Like, no idea. And that's kind of, I think, what,
so,
I know.
Yeah.
That's all, so I think it's just like a whole separate conversation. Yeah, we need to. Not, but at the end of the day, this is still enough for you. What are we gonna do? Is it the school board job? Is it the accountant's job? Is it the facility guy? Like, I have no idea. No one can necessarily come in. And that's my next.
Well, it's a combination of all those people, right? So it's the, what's that? Well, I think something important, I know Nancy was on tour the other night, and we were talking, I think she was talking about how it's not that nothing's been done at New Franklin. I actually got from Ken Lynchy, who's our facilities guy, a list of things that over the last 10 years that have been significant investments at the building that have been done. Now, the biggest one was the one we talked about the other night, which is HVAC systems. That was a two-year project. That was a significant investment in the space. So it's not that nothing has been done, but it is objectively different space. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
And the walls that are there, unless we get like people in to help. You know
I mean,
what
I think,
Like,
and I think there's two parts of the conversation, or there's like probably 10 parts of the conversation, really, but I mean, there's the, equitable distribution of students across the elementary spaces that we have in the district, and how we might get to that. There's also the needs, and so one of the things that's coming up for next year is $3 million investment. That's for New Franklin. There's another 2.5 and 2029, and that's on a slide here as well. But that's part of that is what that was meant to do when it was proposed 5 years ago, prior to whenever it came up. This CIP cycle in the city is such that like it comes on, priorities are readdressed. So that is on the draft plan that for next year. And so this is a time when those conversations, like it's not like we have to put in a request now for 5 years, but there are some other work around what to do with that.
But I've also been told that's not enough money. Like within regards to like.
I think this, I think
I've
this-
been told a lot of money going to the front to make it safe, and that none of the money can be used towards repairing parts of the building.
So the plans what had been sketched out for multiple years before I even got in the district was that the primary focus was going to be on security. And so right now, and that was the first, and that fits with some of how we prioritize things. When you drop your kids off, we want to make sure your kids are safe. That's the first thing. And then the next thing is, okay, now we're going to educate. So the plan had been around the concern that there is not a vestibule that people are using to enter the building. And instead you jump out into the middle of the building when you get buzzed in, nobody has eyes on you. So the original investment was going to be around that. And then there was some shifting of the office space in the building towards the back. And there had been some discussion at one point about the possibility of creating 2 additional classrooms that would push out towards the flagpole. But there's real concerns that 5 million at this point doesn't do that. It doesn't really accomplish, it's not enough. To do that.
And I would just say, I think there's advocacy for more capital improvements at the school. I don't think that's this specific conversation.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah,
gonna say.
yeah.
Those are completely separate conversations. The budget for regular, annual 5-year, 10-year improvements of the CapEx that happens throughout it, is relevant. Is very relevant. Conversation of a space being used for 6 different things, probably more, and then potentially could be taken offline. That's a red flag, new budget conversation, immediate funding, because that fund is not, that is a very different fund. We really appreciate it on whatever school you're in. Any CapEx is always welcome. This is emergency CapEx. Sorry, your budget's not there for it. Go find the money, call the state, do something else. Like, this should not affect the students in any way. This is adult decisions that don't know how to do a budget properly and forgot about it. So totally different.
And I will just say the Portsmouth has a very unique budget model, not dismissing that, but the idea that the school department doesn't control the capital improvement budget, that's different from other places. So it's not that we have a fund every 3 million every year that the school department gets to say, we're gonna improve this, improve that. It's all part of this other cycle. So I do think that it's important to acknowledge this, and the intention of putting this up is really about the individual impacts on students, especially students who need more individual instruction or intervention. And we should be talking more, and the board is definitely going to be talking more about what to do with the space. But as far as the redistricting and kids, I think it's important if we're moving toward a model that's more choice focused, for folks to be able to understand what the individual impacts on kids is.
I just want to say one other thing. This is not new. This thing was a classroom 2 years ago. And that's why it's called the Sweet Suite, because there was a teacher, last name Sweet, who was in this classroom. So these functions were then, OT was in a hallway, PT was in a hallway, the things that were happening within distributed possibility. So this has been a thing that's been like on again, off again for multiple years.
And with any budget, whether it's $100 grand or $100 million, if you've ever built a budget or done a big project like this, it goes by the wayside 15 different times before you get to the bottom.
Yes.
So like there's an ever evolving process to it, and that like everybody should, if they've ever tried to manage a budget, understand that. And like you peel back the layer of the onion. Like, okay, we want to paint this wall, and then you put the paintbrush on the wall.
Yeah, but that's
changing the budget.
Absolutely.
that wall is, like I said, we had a conversation, that wall is not a code wall. Like, you do any work in this space.
Yeah.
Before your arm falls down.
A silver lining that maybe come out of all of this, by doing this, that was amazing. Having these photo evidence, great. And maybe, in the future, this doesn't affect this, but, bringing to the council, because I feel like I have written into city council before, I'm sure other people have here, kind of saying we need more funds for our schools. It's really great that we can build amazing skate parks. But as an educator, I'd also like to see something go into our schools for our kids. So maybe they need to do a walkthrough and kind of see all these things.
100%. Nancy,
I would just like to dispel what I really think is a rumor. I've been involved for 25 years. I have never, ever had a discussion about New Franklin closing. That is not true. That has never been at the school board level. It's never been at the city council level. We have no plan to close New Franklin schools. So I would just like to put that out there and ask you all, that's not true. It's a rumor. Okay. So if not,
I have private conversations with people who are on the school board, and that's what they told me.
well, that's not true. It's not true. We have.
No, I would think there's no plan that I own. I want to make sure I've been in a couple of different public settings. Have said there's not a school board conversation about this, but the long term in terms of trying to, if the goal is to make Little Harbour, the goal is to have New Franklin have facilities that are equivalent to Dondero. It's a significant investment. And we just went through a period, the last cycle, we're just introducing modular classrooms for a short period of time, and a small fraction of that amount was a big controversy. And the city council indicated that they felt it was just a bad investment, and there's reasons why. Short term, you don't want to do that type of thing, but just in general, they were pushing back on that. So I think there's this question: if folks know that here there are potentially 5 classrooms we could use, and then to make New Franklin on par with Dondero could be $10 million, 15. Is the community at large, if those things were introduced, with the community at large support putting that type of investment in New Franklin when we know we have like about a 1% declining enrollment over the long term? I don't know the answer to that question, but I posed it in at least 2 different settings, and that's not the school board saying that. It's just me trying to game out long term. But where does this lead in the long run?
Can we get back to the redistricting part? Or are there pressing things that?
I guess I was just gonna say that I think it gets back to then we need to bring the city council through, and,
Yeah.
and I wasn't able to be there for the tours. Please excuse me for being so glib right now, but I also think it then means that how many members of the school board had not been through each school before the tours last week? I think that's problematic that we have school board members that were saying, oh, wow, I really should have done this 3 years ago. And how can you be making decisions about our schools if you haven't even seen them? Like, this is something that should have come up years ago. This is something that the new council could have come through. And I think that should be day one. If you're an elected official in the school board, you're seeing all the schools that you're making decisions about. I mean, and here we are talking about moving our kids across schools, and some school board members haven't even seen schools. Sorry, I'm just,
It totally, I will say though, even as a New Franklin parent, looking at those schools, walking through the way that we did, very eye-opening. Like, I've been in the school hundreds of times, right? But it's part, and I think all of our school board members do see all the schools. It's just, they may go into one space for a meeting, go here, we're not touring the facilities, and that's part of what came up.
Right? Site plans, literacy, math, all that stuff, and just the way we deliver education is different. So, like, the schools aren't, not all schools are supportive of that. I think Dondero is just a great model of like how it could be potentially everywhere. Not that it's gonna be exactly that, but it just was really amazing personally for me to kind of like, okay, like we have a suite for special education, we have like we this like old team room, we have like a conference space, like it was just really nice and warm thing for me to see that a school does exist like that, and like maybe this is eye-opening for the community to be like, oh, we could do one. All of our schools, this is working here. We would love for all of our schools maybe to have something like this, or as close to that community. I don't know, but
So let's just bracket. I would like to, at the very end, we'll go back to building improvements and that sort of piece and talk about some like next steps for that. But we're straying far from this. So now that we talk about how lovely Dondero is, let's talk about moving students from Dondero to another school. But I will go back at the end. Yes, Pip.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say for the sake of clarity and transparency here that I really hope you're right, Nancy, that getting rid of New Franklin is not one of our discussions, but I will say that each of these 3 people at the front of the room mentioned that in the last meeting that we had. It's not, I don't think it was raised by the public. I think it came from the committee. And so I just wanted, I don't know if you guys want to comment on that right now, but I know you both agree with it.
Sure, I mean, I'll take that. So I think So to the conversation, she just left, but, so even the conversation around like, if there's, if you ban 2 schools, right? That has implication of there being 2 schools and not a third one. So I think there's sort of like, a natural sort of like, what does that scenario look like? And I think it's, I would just say that I don't think it's a terrible idea to look 5, 10 years down the line, imagine different scenarios, and better ways we can, organize our city, our schools, and those sorts of things. And I've engaged in those conversations, not as like, this is an idea I think we should do, but as to not close the door on like opposing ideas. Like, I think it's really important to hold in your head multiple opposing ideas at the same time. I don't know a better way to get to some sort of conclusion that connects all those sort of different thoughts together. So I feel like I've had those conversations because I think all ideas are worth entertaining. That's not to say that at the board level, it's entertained as a realistic option. But it is to say like, it is a conversation that's happened, because it's a realistic conversation. Whether it's, if you look at the population over the next 10 years, if you look 10 years down the line and we see the drop, like but that isn't to say like that's the reality in front of us now. So I've had some of those conversations, but it's not to advocate for that. I'm not advocating for that. And I've not advocated for, and I don't think it's a good idea. I think investing in New Franklin School was what we should do. I think we should spend money there. But that's not to say I haven't had that conversation, because like I think it's worthwhile to go down those pathways.
So it sounds like both are true. It's not something the school board's entertaining, but it is something to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think this has been hard because we haven't heard like a lot of, I think I was like the one who had conversations. I never heard, yeah, let's put money there. Kind of
Yeah.
I'm hearing that, like, people
Oh.
are really advocating for it, like, yes, they should, and I think it's hard for me to hear, like, well, I might not be here.
Yeah.
Oh, so maybe it's.
Yeah, I think the motivation of pushing, not pushing, of having folks go through that school is for the advocacy. Like that's what, you know,
And,
Yeah.
and I think part of it is just in the process is like, in me being like, oh, the CIP process is this 5-year cycle, blah, 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 is not me saying like, oh, don't do it. It's like, it's emergency, like, it's not like, we're gonna put this in our plans and advocate for more funds for New Franklin. The current process would be, a request would be added, it would be 5 years, it would be 30 at this point, like, and so if anything else is being, if that's not the pathway, there's a whole nother movement that has to happen. But also I think we need to redistrict too. So it's like one of those, like, I think we can hold up, we can advocate for New Franklin and improve the space. We can also allow options in order to have more equitable distribution of students across 3 different elementary schools for the time being. It's not that like, we'll just move some students and then we don't have to worry about New Franklin. Absolutely not. It's having that space to do that. If everything is already in the halls and then we're going to be doing construction, that's another challenge that's not going to be experienced in the other schools that have that are not doing special education in hallways and between exterior doors and interior doors. So I think they are related, but the more space allows for more successful modification of the space as well.
Yeah, I would just say like, I think that the population movement and like where we are now and what it looks like in 10 years. And this is where I'm like thinking optimistically, is an opportunity to invest in New Franklin and get dedicated spaces. But I think it requires some transition of students. I think that's part of that. That's where those things sort of converge. Where do we spend money and do kids move? I think that's where that converges in my mind. Like that's, yeah. But I think we should get into some of those projections. I don't know if we want to run through.
Oh, yeah, I think I
Yeah.
talked about this, but there's lots of resources. I won't go into any more detail, but around, it's helpful, I think, in advocating to understand how the Portsmouth CIP process works, which works like no other place. In any other place, it's very unique and important. Move
Okay,
past
I
this
get-
one.
Okay. I just want to get to the slide and like what's after. So this is the last 10 years. And this is, so you have New Franklin, which has been relatively stable in terms of its population. Dondero has seen over the last 10 years, what averages out on mean to be about 0.5% of increase year over year over the last 10 years. And at Little Harbour, you're seeing a 1% year over year decrease over the last 10 years. And we'll see sort of this play out, and this is just visualized in a different way, but the same information. But I want this to stay with us as we move to this slide here, which is the NASDAQ projections. And the bottom green area is the elementary schools. And so where we came from is this, 1,024 or 1,042 total enrollment K through 5. And we're sitting this year at about 900. But that hasn't been equal in terms of getting from 1045 to 900. It's been more coming out of Little Harbour and slight increases at Dondero. So that's, what's that?
Oh, I didn't know.
This one? Yeah, okay.
So one of the things that we've heard a lot is that New Franklin enrollment is consistent, et cetera. What is inconsistent is the percent share, the proportion of students. So where in beginning of this, you're at about 24%, you're increasing overall to 28% this year. And
And
then
so that, just so that 28% is the share of the share of the burden of
burden of
education
students
Yeah.
on,
across each school. So go back 10 years, Little Harbor's taking 40% to 20%. And so we're getting to this place now where Little Harbor is now basically on par with Dondero burden share. And New Franklin has also had an increase in burden share over that, just the overall population has come down. Yeah. And so, right, so we're here. And so looking forward, I think what's important about this projection, and we're working from these assumptions that this projection has some basis behind it. These things might not happen this way, but that's the premise that we're working from in this conversation. So what we see here is that there's actually stability in the number of kids in the elementary school between now and 2034. Supposedly 915 this year, supposedly 915 in 10 years. So actually at the elementary school, we're going to see the same number, but we've seen this, the where the population have moved is sort of driven. And so if you extrapolate that out over the next 10 years, you get something like this, where the population at Little Harbour drops below Dondero, and you have a slight increase at Dondero, and that burden share even becomes more inequitable going forward. And we showed this slide before. I want to go through some key points here. I want to get to this slide. Okay, so I think this is really important in terms of how we're framing this, or how this is framed in my mind, is that you go back to 2013, the district share of New Franklin in terms of the burden is at 25%. If you do anything in 10 years, you're up to 28% as far as the district share. So the burden is increased. And so this number 262 is based on, and there's a table here, and this will all be published. So this analysis here basically is showing.
I
yeah.
want to introduce
Okay.
it more.
Okay.
Do you want to go back?
Yeah.
Finish the other?
This one, yeah. So just to show, current is 247, we actually think we'll be at 262 in 10 years, and that's based on, there's actually some historic increase in New Franklin, though be it slight. So if you drag the spreadsheet 10 years, you get to 262, and at that enrollment, the assumption here is sweet's out of the picture, and you have no flex classrooms. And so it doesn't get better, even now it's not good. And it doesn't get better, and maybe it gets worse in terms of definitely the district share, and also the flex classroom situation. But I want to compare this to the other three schools. Then maybe we can go back.
Just one quick
Yeah.
report. Relatively speaking, 2013, which is you know, the no move 10 years.
Yeah.
Number. Give or take.
Yeah.
Close, right?
Yeah.
Did we have a redistricting conversation in 2013?
Last, the district conversation was 10 years ago, or I believe it was, yeah.
So when was, Nancy, when was the last actual move was 20 years ago?
That was the last time we read it.
Yeah, but so in
If we had
2013, essentially, it would be
So,
we have a similar conversation, given the numbers currently we have now that we're having a conversation in the projections for 10 years. Like 2013 would be kind of like a little bit of a model of what happened and what could have happened. Like if it's
Yeah,
similar,
so
like what, you know, it was drastically more in 2013 with enrollment in the distribution and all that stuff. But
all the other schools were at that same place,
got it,
you know, in 2013. So like Little Harbor was full
got it. Yeah.
at that point. So it's just a little,
Yeah, so to get the other, so there's the Dondero numbers, and I think,
or just, can you just go to the projection and I'll just
Okay.
explain it because this is a lot. So I think one of the issues that sort of you speak to and one of our thoughts through all this process is there has not been a process for monitoring. So as if you can't tell, analysis is being done by Byron and I. We don't have an analyst in the school department that's looking at trends and projections. We don't have city capacity to support, like, that's not something that's been built in. I think we have some ideas on neighborhood monitoring, on development we have all these ideas for the future that can be better markers for when we need to have the conversation. So we hope to bake that in. But given the people somehow got appointed to this awesome role, so the way that those numbers were that we came up with is that the percent district share is projected by the historical trend. So we take the NES-DEC numbers that are like, you're gonna have 900. Then we look at how has the district share for the school changed historically. And so that's that percentage there. Then we take the NES-DEC numbers, which is in this column, total K through 5. And then we estimate the district share to enrollment, okay? And then these ones are based on sort of what we have as kind of an ideal that New Franklin may be operating at 14 classrooms. So then in our transition planning, the reason that we have 2 levels of green is that this transition would happen over time. 14 wouldn't happen immediately by any means. So one thing that we're mindful of is we want it to be that everyone 100% opt into a transition. So for New Franklin, we're talking, there's 3 neighborhoods that we've currently thought of that have some folks that want to transition, have probably a few more that are likely to transition. So if all of those were to transition at once, Little Franklin. New Franklin would drop to about 186. Are you following me so far?
okay. So let's back,
Just, let me finish this and we'll go back to that, okay? Just, so then the other piece would be if 25% opt in. So initially, when we had done estimations, that kind of looks like this. We had talked about 50% transition. What we see from the surveys is everybody loves their school, and we're probably gonna only have a 10 to 25% transition from each neighborhood. So we're being a little, so imagine that 25% is probably the highest that we'll have in the first year. So that would mean that next year, if 25% of the neighborhoods move from New Franklin or transitions, that the numbers would be 228, which would be much lower than they are now. So I just want to we'll go back to the 3 neighborhoods, but does this make sense how this is generated? Any questions just on how this was generated? Okay, so now go back to the.
Sorry, and I should have set this up better, and I apologize. So all the next projections and this model revolves around 4 or 5 neighborhoods moving. The ones we talked about in the past, but also Meadowbrook, which is you take like the past Borthwick on 33. There's like that little Oakley neighborhood, I think sometimes it's called. That is Little, that is New Franklin.
I don't, where is that? Hopefully, road, I'm pretty close to it. That's in Portland.
Back. So sorry, Meadowbrook, it's behind the hospital, so, yeah, yeah. Yeah, Co-Chairs, yeah. That is, there's a tiny, there's one neighborhood there, it's like, half of it's like, sort of like nineties construction, and then like, there's a loop that's like fifties benches, yeah, yeah.
So it would be just there and then Atlantic Heights, which is next
Next
to
up.
Osprey.
Yeah, and so just a quick on like why those neighborhoods. So there's 3 reasons in my head why those neighborhoods. The first is sort of busing and like is this feasible in terms of like transportation? So because Osprey is already cut out for Little Harbour, potentially there's transportation over there. That's one. 2 is the right size move. These 3 neighborhoods over 10 years helps us get to where we want to go in terms of like the distribution. That's to the question of like, if you just move Powder House, is it enough? No, right? I think we kind of got in there. But I think, and so this is like, how do you get those numbers to where you can have those 14 classrooms, so you can invest in those spaces? And if you drag it out over 10 years, and this is where there's like an opportunity, because there's this change in population that we've seen. If you map a longer transition to a longer decline in population in one area of town, I think there's some an opportunity to do this in a soft way in terms of like transition and choice, right? Letting people choose and letting that take time, and that's actually works with how long it's taking time in terms of people moving in the town. So I want to get back to, yeah. Would be, right, so the 5 neighborhoods.
You go backwards. Okay, so the idea and what we're calling transition neighborhoods, and we sent out communication on Friday because from Tuesday, so this has been a thought, we sort of had discussed it like as a potential option, but then after Tuesday, we were really like, we need to do this.
Yeah, and I think, and I'll just be like, fully like, I feel like this has been.
Not we need to do this, we need to
Yeah.
present this as an option.
Yeah.
If this is in our heads and it's coming out, we have a community forum on Sunday. And we are already asking people for their time, and if we have an idea for us not to talk about it, and we think it satisfies a lot of the community feedback, would be wrong, so apologies for that, but. Oh, yeah. So the idea would be that neighborhoods would be designated as transition neighborhoods, with the idea that these would be redistricted to Little Harbour eventually. That would mean that families could choose when they wanted to transition, but we would expect that what we want to avoid is bopping back and forth. Like, oh, I didn't like this teacher assignment, I want to go here, that there's like a commitment that you're part of that community, that you integrate that. And then the transitions are optional, etc. The idea would be to maintain continuity, stability, and community building for all. So for instance, if you made a choice you had a 2nd grader and you have an incoming K, and you think that's the time to make that transition, great. You want to put your kindergartner in your 2nd grader school, great. Like whatever that is. The one piece that this does not address is some of the feedback, which is much less than the family choice part, but that a lot of our neighborhoods want their neighborhoods to stick together and be together. And so, there are folks that don't want their next door neighbor's kid, who's also in 2nd grade, to be at another school, and I totally get that. But it would be really important for parents and like to have that understanding, to have that conversation, to be respectful of, obviously of people's choices, and also like, well, isn't that great? You get different experiences.
Could people, part of their family?
Yes, I think it's the only,
So I-
there's one, sorry, I'm sorry.
No, I think.
It would be based on a student. So once a student is,
Thank you.
I feel like I'm isolated in my voice because I don't have children yet in school and I respect everyone's experience. But I continue to be disappointed that the main part of the feedback we keep discussing is from people who are already in the school and not from the people who are outside. of school. I don't think they've done a good enough job seeking input from people with incoming children into the district and what that means to their neighborhoods. That matters too. Community building within our neighborhood matters too. And you've already heard from people in communities feeling like they can't have these conversations. They don't want to speak out because it's uncomfortable. Because then you're like with these neighbors, you care about what their opinion is too, but then it's awkward. Like it's become a really uncomfortable conversation. And I don't think that you're not hearing the voices of everyone. And I don't think that you sought the voices of everyone else personally.
I have an incoming kindergartner, he's 4 right now in the peak program at Little Harbour. And we currently, we live at 802 Middle Road. So we have a community that's Little Harbour, the newly built community that's top of Peebly, I believe that's Little Harbour. But we're currently slated to go to Dondero. The little guy's special needs and he's here, he's done great here, he's thriving here, and we'd like the choice to be able to keep him here. So, and not go to Dondero. And I'm wondering, is there gonna be a process for folks to appeal a decision based on what their little kiddo might need?
there is a process of, like a school reassignment. It starts with the superintendent and it requesting that based on individual circumstances. It can be then appealed to the board. Like there is a process and we can talk a little more about that one-on-one too. But I think, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Never mind. I don't think anything.
Yeah,
But that may. It's like this weird section of middle.
Yeah.
Okay, and now they're just, I like, I. kind of understand what you're talking about.
yeah, I would just say for the, well, we haven't decided yet. But in all of the plans, there's no students right now that come from Pepperly. And all the plans so far is if we make a change, well, this is for the committee to decide, but in all of the plans so far, Pepperly will go back, would be in Dondero. So that's something that we've like had in the plans because there's no students there now. And
You say Pepperly just because we
Not
talk about it all the
Pepperly,
time. Parsons Wood.
Parsons Wood. Yeah,
In the middle is,
So
it's before.
yeah, absolutely.
in the first,
Oxford is-
in the first part of this,
All that we're doing.
Please, yeah.
in the first, it'll be helpful for us to sit down with you with the map, just to understand, because in the first, like, part of this, we were really looking for feedback on neighborhoods of like, does this make sense? Because some of these neighborhood designations were based on the information that we had, but we didn't really get feedback around.
I watched the video.
Yeah.
I watched the video and I was like, oh, I really need to
So
jump in
we
on
can,
this.
yeah, so we can talk more about that or see what that impact is.
So kind of like this is more of there's kind of similar to what you just mentioned, you would potentially be part of the solution as an opt-in, where you would want to
Right.
come to the Little Harbour at first, saying, you know,
And
we're
do I have-
like, people are on the other side of that, so that's helpful. But we're talking about the opt-in, so, and you just address like the opt-out of appealing, like. It seems only there's an opt-in option and not an opt-out, like, all right, we make the decision and say, well. I don't like that, so I'm gonna opt out of that, you know, like, and.
Then your kids would stay at the school that you're currently districted to.
So that is a possibility.
Oh,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
So like, you essentially, all of this chatter is, all right, now, whatever decisions made. And there needs to be X amount of children moved. There's a very high probability that everybody that's pissed about it just feels and nothing.
A lot, a lot,
No, so-
Wait, we're not talking about, this is a totally separate situation from this.
and what we're
So
saying.
this is individual, like, we need to touch base, we need to talk more about this situation. It's not covered in
For
this.
all of the neighborhoods we're talking about. For the foreseeable future. The parents and their families will have a choice as to where their kids go. Yeah, so that is what we're saying. That is what we were saying.
No, the committee has to hear it and there's more logistics that need to, but let's go through.
Yeah.
Or, I'm sorry, I don't think we've gone through all the details. So can we go through the details first? Okay.
Okay, we walked through the New Franklin numbers, and sort of the spreadsheet there. And these are the Dondero numbers, and this is actually more concerning. To me, because this is where you've seen the population grow over time. Because you started a district share of 30% 10 years ago, and you're 40% 10 years from now, with an average class size of 20. Where we've been, and like average is a number that it doesn't mean in a specific classroom, but it means you could have classrooms of 23, 24, and like the basement of that is like your 17s, where if it's 17 classroom average in the school, your ceiling is your 20, your basement is your 14. That's kind of where Dondero is now, right? I think if you fast forward 10 years, you have 24-person classrooms in 10 years, if we don't do anything by the numbers that we have. So I think this is like the concern that we have with the neighborhoods we've identified for Dondero, which is Hillside Lafayette Park. In 10 years, you're basically the same load that you're at now, this 35%, which matches the number of national classrooms at Dondero, which is 19 compared to. So there's 55 national classrooms or 55 classroom sections in the district right now. 19 is 34%. So that is relatively clean as far as like a 10-year projection. And so if we go back to New Franklin, I want to point out those numbers at the bottom. So the move in 10 years, the district shares at 23%. And if you're at 14 classrooms, which is where I want to be, then your classroom is at 25%. That's also like sort of, I think, in a tolerance level that makes sense to me in terms of like overall load for the classrooms.
You don't have a pointer, do you?
I don't have a pointer, yeah. And so these spreadsheets are the same. So this is the same as this spreadsheet, it's just with Dondero. This will be published, so if you want to come back and look, get into the numbers, they'll definitely be there. I just want to get to Little Harbour key numbers so we can have the whole data set in our heads in terms of a 10-year move. So if you don't do anything in 10 years, your average class size at Little Harbour with 21 sections, which is, so when we moved the 2 classrooms from Little Harbour to Dondero with the modulars, there was 21 at Little Harbour. Now there's 19. If those 2 modulars go away, assumedly those 2 teachers go back to Little Harbour, you have 21 sections here. So that's this math in terms of if there's no moves, you basically have an average class size of 13, which really doesn't make a ton of sense because you're talking about basement of 10, ceiling of 17. Plus you have 5 flex classrooms. If you get to the move of 10 years, you get back to that district share of 40%, which is still below the that matches with somewhere in the the number of classrooms. Like that's where like that tolerance, I think. So this is where like if you take that 10-year plan, you allow the transition, you match it with the trends in terms of like the population moves. Like that's what these 5 neighborhoods by the numbers and their relative proximity, transportation. That's why that's like the rationale for why they're in this particular iteration. So I just hope I communicated well, like why these neighborhoods, why that amount of time. Yeah.
I think the bigger summary, because clearly we're both data geeks, is that, we have got the community feedback that pushed this deeper dive for us was really like, I heard nothing needs to happen. I heard Dondero's fine now. I hear it's just from the bubble. I hear that, New Franklin's consistent in like those conversations. And we felt like, no, we're really still concerned about Dondero. We're really still concerned about New Franklin. And so that was this endeavor. We could not find a better, more succinct way to not have 45 numbers on a slide in order to march it out. But I think the summary of what we take away from this is that there is still concern about increasing numbers at Dondero and that being a 10-year trend, not just a 1-year factor.
I feel like, yeah, I just want to, yeah.
And I think this idea of, when we look at it and see that like, oh, the history was that New Franklin had 24% of the population. We're operating right now that we're going to continue to run 3 elementary schools, and how to balance that. This district share is just one idea. There's a different way you can talk about it, present it. There's probably a better name for it, but that's just what we came up with.
And I just like do we need to do this at Dondero? I feel like we had the conversation about the modulars, we needed more space. The numbers came in this year and they were less than some had projected. That's 1 year. That's like your car doesn't start one morning and then it does the next, and you're like, my car's fixed. Like, I don't think that's like a great way to think about this. You still want to get your starter done. Like, I just so this, the point of this conversation is like, there is if you look at the trends, there's an issue. We saw a blip of a larger systemic issue, and I think that's real, and like that's where I'm at. Yeah.
Just a question, I think kind of what Caitlin's been talking about not being included in the conversation with younger children. So with this parent choice, opt to stay in or opt to leave, is that only for families that are currently in the district? Or is it for any family within the neighborhood?
Any family within the
And when
neighborhood.
does that end? When do you say?
So it would-
"Sorry,
So let's keep going.
Okay.
Um,
So another table with the same sort of projection. Okay.
oh, we didn't have that. Okay. So I think, so one of the things that I think I put it in the email that went out, but the idea would be that because the board doesn't want to get into like, oh, okay, you get to do it. Zach sure doesn't want to get into it. The idea is that we can accommodate this transition and this choice for these neighborhoods. We're sort of giving warning that we see in 5 to 10 years, these neighborhoods are probably going to need to be fully transitioned. And we want to give the opportunity to see what happens with choice in that time. So this would be something that kind of, as I talked about, like monitoring options or things like that, that we would be looking at neighborhood enrollments. We'd be doing more to understand the students coming in, like doing annual outreach to the daycares or whoever it is. And that this would be like renewed annually. If it's not renewed, so like if, I don't know, something changes in 2 years and then in October, we're having this thing about, do we renew school choice, or try not to call it school choice because there's a bad name of school choice in this district, but I've already called it that. So if we're going to renew transition neighborhoods, and we say we really need more folks to move. This isn't helping. Dondero and New Franklin are really overburdened. Then that would still be like a 2 to 3 year projection. So it would be like, that's when a grandfathering option might come in, or that piece. But for this, I guess, pilot of this, there wouldn't be any of those restrictions. It would be, you're in this neighborhood, where do you want to go to school?
Yes.
sorry if I'm not just not getting it, but like, so I'm a kindergartner, and I guess I'm wondering, like, are you saying at any point, presumably you could, like, if she's in 5th grade, realize it's probably not gonna happen when she's in 1st grade, when she's in 5th grade, could you decide relatively quickly, like, when she's in 4th grade, next year, she has to suddenly transition? Like, I'm trying to understand as a parent, like, what my timeline is for understanding when my child could potentially be told we would have to suddenly not have children.
That is not something that we can have a solid answer on. I think what we're hoping happens is that knowing that this is gonna happen, families are gonna make the best choice for them. And the trend is gonna be increasing movement to Little Harbour. So my hope is that would never happen, but it would require annual review. So it's more on that. I think most likely what would happen in that case would be that transition neighborhoods would be ended. Students would be students currently enrolled are staying where they are to finish that out. But that new K would be would be redistricted
I just-
to
yeah.
Little Harbour.
I just think that like.
Wait, but just, does that make sense?
I think so. So you're saying my kid, for instance, would now be told she couldn't finish her time,
As-
but maybe a new kid would be told they could start at.
What we're trying to do is find a solution that moves students over time that doesn't require anyone to be transitioned immediately. And we think that this would be that.
Yeah, I think that,
I just want to I just keep asking questions because your confusion is the same confusion other people in the room are having. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not quite a yes or no answer that I'm getting.
Right.
And maybe you don't have quite a yes or no answer. But that, like, getting to a yes or no-ish answer, I think will be really helpful to other.
do I foresee any circumstance where your fourth grader would have to move to Little Harbor suddenly? No.
But a younger sibling.
It's the, I mean, essentially, you could grandfather, like, if you, the family choice, then the family could be grandfathered, so any new children coming into that family. It's like if the new K comes in, you only have a new K, that's your start there. If I've got a fourth grader and then I have another kid that's coming in, my family and my choice. would
And
be grand-
I think one thing that does come through in the survey results and the written responses is that, to be honest, people want to go where their neighbors are going. So I think a lot of this allows driving our 4 houses. We all have third graders. Let's all go together. Let's all stay where we are. And I think that it is an individual family choice, but I think that there's a lot that's going to happen that's based on who your community is.
And it starts at your family first. like,
Right.
I'd rather split up the community a little bit before I split up my family.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think still, be like a state position for all to get out, like. We have 2 children, right? Yeah, it's like, I want to move my neighbor. So I'm gonna send my kindergarten, my kid to kindergarten in 2 years, but I still have a like, I can. All the people
We're kicking the can. This whole discussion will happen again. Absolutely will happen again.
So it
And-
has to be the same, it has to be like, it has to be a family to make it possible.
But
I told them,
But this is allowing for immediate relief of schools without with giving what we've heard from all the feedback, ultimately the choice is at the family level.
I think,
I honestly think that I don't know how old your baby is, but
7 months.
oh God.
And it matters. I mean, that's why I'm
Right,
here.
but so in my idealistic world, this may be able to continue in 5 years, like that. You get to that at that same time, if this works, then in 5 years, you still are on school choice or the neighborhood is fully transitioned over. So at the point where everyone in the neighborhood is going to Little Harbor, then we might as well just have them redistricted and have all the kids in the neighborhood go to Little Harbor. Does that make sense?
I think,
What doesn't?
you're still calling that for children.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's not.
Same
that's
problem
not the
that we're in now. You're just imposing it on numbers.
I think there's some specifics on like, what happens on those long tails of families, and I think we probably owe it to just like. Listen and have more specifics on this. I think, but I do want
Sort
to.
of like what the second
What the-
phase is.
Yeah, what the second phase is,
Yeah.
and I think that, what we wanna. If we look at that 10-year number and we're like, we don't wanna be there, right? We don't wanna be in a place where there's 13% or 13 kids in the class at this school and 24 at that one, right? There's a line somewhere, trying to phase the line a little bit. But there's a line somewhere. And so I think this is one solution. There's another solution, which is just everyone goes, the 5-year we talked about, this is a community, you know, this conversation this is a phase line, is this better? Relative to like what we see in 10 years.
Obviously I've spoken a lot about this, but I do really want to say thank you to you guys. Because you guys, this is not your full-time job. And I really appreciate that you guys have gone above and beyond. To be in this position, to also take on board all the feedback that you've been given. Going through the survey, going through the different results. Like, you guys have worked really hard on this, and I appreciate you constantly evolving this. You haven't gone black and white from the start. You've taken the survey into account. You've taken our discussion into account. So I do really appreciate that. And also things that have happened in the background, like I didn't know that you'd brought kindergarten registration forward to try to eliminate, like things like that, that we don't know about them. And from my point of view, I really appreciate that. I also appreciate you looking at families having a choice, because, you know, as I said numerous times, we know the best for our situation. And I do feel like this is a good compromise to from what we've heard about. The only thing to mirror what Tricia said is the fact of you guys might not be on the school board for the next 10 years. And as much as you put so much work into this and would honor the conversations that you've had, my concern having someone in kindergarten right now, my youngest, is that say in 3 years time, I've been like, okay, I'm going to keep my family together. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. If she has to move in 3 years, I should have moved her now. So that's just my kind of like, you know, clogs clicking in my brain. But if you say it's a transitional piece that, you know, someone's going to honor the same work you've done, you know, that was just my concern.
And I think part of that would be within a plan and
Sure.
getting some of these details. And so I think the conversation around like, well, what about is like, that's feedback that we need to then incorporate in. And we can be as specific as like, here's transition neighborhoods. Then the next set of decision would be redistricting with grandfathering or redistricting, you know, whatever that is.
Be like transitions over, you need to move your kids. Like, it's not gonna be like that.
Right. And many of you, and I appreciate your noticing that we're trying to be responsive as best we can. But I think as many of you have noticed and commented, like we're trying to fix something that probably could have been like changed in 2013 or in, you know, years ago. And so part of it is that there's been so much certainty in Portsmouth about, I live in this neighborhood, this is the school, and that takes time. We've heard from people that have purchased the homes in there's, you know, and at this point we're all in $1 million homes, or many, that's like the base model, right, in Portsmouth. So everyone's like kind of using that of like, I've paid over $1 million for this home, so my kid could go to New Franklin, right? And not that we should drive the equity of all children based on that, but that's a different conversation than when the conversation was 10 years ago. And
It's hard to make a solid
right.
decision.
to be like, you know what, actually, I really want to stay in New Franklin, so I'm gonna move is not feasible, period. So I think we're trying to take all those things in. Like there is that uncertainty, but as we develop more thoughts on this, I think what would be helpful would be to get more of the, like, what do you need to know? What does need to be in the plan? Is there something that can be in that sort of transition neighborhood plan that helps you feel more assured that you're going to be able to do?
Yeah, you're making a tough decision. It's the right one. I don't have to question it.
But I think you pointed it out there, it's the continuity and consistency. This can't change and take a curve, you know, in a year, 2 years, 5 years, like it's whatever is decided now is gonna affect people for a lot longer than these conversations. So you have to think about this decision in 10 years going out, but it's an immediate effect now as well as down the line. So like it all has to keep the consistent line going through and be documented and solidified. Like it is an ever revolving thing, like you said, like it's, all right, we're gonna make this kind of decision, and there's subsets of that, and then we're gonna address those decisions and that and all that. But it all has to be then, to your point of, okay, we did it. That's great, we finally solved this problem, and everybody's roughly, still unsatisfied, well, at least it's on paper. And like, now it can't change if you guys say, this was so annoying, I'm out, I'm not doing it next year, and then somebody else can go start.
There will be nothing more therapeutic to me than producing a very long report that no one will actually read, that will have all of the details of all of the findings, and to say, final version 5, submitted, done, it's on the website. Because it is so valuable to get all this information, and just, we're very dedicated to making sure that that doesn't just fall on like, bye, we're gonna step
think-
away.
I mean, I think I don't wanna be like I mean, 5 years from now, it's true, there could be different board members, it's a public.
Hopefully some of you
Yeah,
in this room
Yeah.
right now.
please run, I think. There is reality, I mean, things are changing and fluid, and there are different board members. I think we owe it to the community to come up with a plan that spells out the rationale and why we did things, and like locks things in the best we can. But ultimately, it's a public body, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Speaking of more permanent things, it seems though that the biggest problem is essentially John Darrow's existing and future growth. Like it's been one of the biggest, right? So I was just looking at the map, and there's a great big chunk of woods there. Their plan, like it's a modular is a great solution. It's a lot cheaper than $15 to $20 million. You can throw a couple of those, and we frankly throw a Band-Aid on that. And then John Darrow, you could heavy lift. Such a pain in the butt, huge budget, huge meetings, the whole thing. But if that's very forecasted as being going to be continuing to be a problem, a minor redistricting potentially might not even solve that if there's another boom of some sort. Is there any conversation about just making John Darrow bigger?
I
in
think that's
part
gonna,
way.
I would put that in that, like, let's wait on a conversation about how to fix all the schools. The one thing I will say is that one thing we are mindful of is that we have this growth that's happening at Sundero, but also we have lots of developments. We don't think those developments are honestly, they're not like 100 new kids to Dondero developments, but that there's just no space in the other areas of town to develop new units. So I think that's part of it. I think before we can even have that conversation or get movement on that, I think we have to utilize the space we have. That's like the responsibility of the board.
Yeah,
And
I keep going in my head like, Matt, like, how do I go to council? How do any of us go to council and say, we need $20 million when we have 5 flex classrooms that are available?
It's gonna be the first fire.
Right, so that's right. And so it's like, if we actually want to do our job, how I see my job in terms of advocating for like getting the funds we need to be good stewards of the resources.
and
And all
she's
the
just-
money that was dumped into the middle school to redo that, that was a massive project.
Yeah.
How much of that space could be restructured?
0 according to administration there.
But it was built to house so much more than there is now.
I mean, that can,
That, I mean, I'm just saying.
now we're improving a third
I'm
building.
not saying that's what I'm saying. As you are thinking of stewards of money that is spent to this community, taxpayers.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's a good point.
you can look at the look at the numbers and the money that was spent, and it does mean thinking about the restructuring of the schools in a different way, but if you want to be progressive in that, just put it on the table, what would it look like?
I'm so sorry, but this hand is gonna fall off, so I'm just gonna, thank you for waiting.
One, Caroline got there first, I also just want to acknowledge and thank you for keeping a very close eye on this process and responding to all that and there's been a lot of input. I did the public record request, block letters, and I feel like we've been put through the ringer, responded incredibly. Thank you. It sounds to me like the general feeling here is that this makes sense, assuming that there is a phased approach where you're opening up transition neighborhoods. That you're giving us some security in our decisions that our children will not be moved, like getting a carpet yanked out from under that. And that also there's sort of like a second phase where siblings get grandfathered in together to accommodate. By the way, I have a so that you're accommodating this phase and this phase. And to me, it sounds like that answers a lot of the questions. So thank you. I know, but I feel like those are probably the two really big questions to the end. Number two, this has been a really educational process. I have never been to a school board meeting until this. I feel like this is a crash course. I started paying attention because of the very direct impact on my own children. But I've stuck around because like I sort of, the second grandfathering got thrown into the conversation. I felt like the box was checked for me, but I've stuck around because I feel like the scope of this has widened a little. And as a community member, somebody who does pay a lot of property taxes, I feel like it's opened my eyes to a lot of the big issues of what you do. But I don't want to lose sight of like, we need to talk about, it started with Dondero space, then it became equity of space. And now I think we do need to never lose sight of the equity of facilities in space. We don't want to live in a community where there is not equity in the demographics of the school. It's really important to me. And also now that I've heard recaps for people who were on that tour, like I think it's quite frankly embarrassing to know that Franklin is in the state that it is. I don't have kids there, but like I pay taxes and I don't want to live in a community or something like that. So I would just ask, like, perhaps there should be a more ongoing effort so that we are not losing sight of things like that, and that school board members do have a regular tour. They understand what it means to be in those buildings, not just for the children, but also the staff. So I guess, sorry, that's a long way of saying, I would hope that you also have learned this in the process, and perhaps this could stay a focus rather than being lost as soon as like you've gotten the parents taken care of and we're not complaining.
Is that gonna be a reality? Is that an option? I don't think so.
I just want to echo the thanks, it's already been said, and also going as far as childcare today. That was.
It's our significant other.
Exactly.
Thank them.
I just want to say thank you. I mean, I chose to leave my son home because I figured he'd be my husband and I had locked enough one of your significant others, but I think, I just have a question, I guess, about the logistical aspect of this and like the vote, I guess, because we're hearing like these phase things, we're hearing, you know, we want to make sure that this is in place for future board members or future iterations, and it is going to be reviewed annually, so I imagine, but like, is this going to be put together in like one really lengthy, like for A1, for A, you know, like how is it, and then school board votes on that, or is it a multi-phased vote? And do we have a sense on when that's happening? Because I really want to stop.
Yeah, so I'll just yeah, I would say that ultimately, I think the committee has to produce a report to the council. And
To the board.
Sorry. Thank you. And the board has to vote on that. In that, I would expect that the co-chairs of this committee would produce a document that outlines, you know, the process thus far. Some of the things that come out of this that aren't specifically to the district. What can we do about like furthering the focus on New Franklin and making sure that we're investing there over time? Like that isn't a new isn't a new redistricting recommendation, but it is a finding of the committee. And then ultimately, you know, what the committee has consensus of, if there is consensus, because we have administrators on that committee, and frankly, I don't know what how their take on this particular plan is going to be. And then ultimately, you know, if anything is going to happen, we need to put it to a vote at the school, and have it go. Yeah.
Part of the goal has been that our budget season for the school board is like January, February. So we wanted to have a, if we were gonna have a proposal, in our minds, it needed to go before we finalized our budget that goes to city council. We have not, it's been challenging to schedule everything during this timeframe, forums, committee meetings, etc. I think we honed in on a committee meeting on January 2nd or 3rd. I think that we will need a second committee meeting before the recommendation goes to the board. So I would say the soonest I would anticipate would be the second board meeting in January, which would be
28th.
the 24th of January.
I think the 14th is the first one, and 28th.
The 28th.
Can I bring out a couple? If you do this cupcake,
That'll just get
yeah, you everything. I know a lot of people on the actually moving together. So
Yeah, it's really.
saying.
if you come with support and cupcakes, come to all of that. Did that get to the specific dates? Okay.
So I teach at the high school and I just wanted to maybe end on just a really nice positive note. No matter what elementary school the students are going to in this community, the students generally do love their school, and you have a huge group of new Franklin parents that may be considered, like, equity and equality is the dream, of course it is. But the students get in the community and the teachers, and let's not judge the book by the cover, because in the walls, whether they're partial walls or real walls, the magic happens in school, and it is a fantastic across the board place where they're going. And you know what? Guess what? They're all going to join forces in middle school, right? And that is the next phase of where we're going in that too. But I know that things on the outside or on the inside don't look the same, but I just want to comment on that, the teachers in the community, and what happens in with what extra funds, limited funds. I mean, we're looking at 3 amazing holiday concerts that are happening last week and this week. So it is for all the, like, when we don't agree, just know that it's a beautiful place here. And it's a dream to talk about. Only 17 students in a class or 19, like, I've been a teacher a long time, and sometimes you have 30 kids in a class. So not to make note of that, but it is, we're lucky. Let's not forget how fortunate we are.
So I would love to take that. I would love to take that as a way to close it down, because I promised my wife 2 hours. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.